Welcome everyone to Firearm Fury. If you're watching this video, you must be wanting to learn how to mount a scope, or you are just a loyal viewer, and I appreciate you. I'll try to make it interesting for you. Anyways, we've got a couple tools here. We've got the level for the rifle barrel, and we've got this lapping kit with a torque wrench screwdriver. We've also got some rings. These are the Arken rings. They actually look identical to the Vortex Pro Series rings. I don't know if they're made by the same manufacturer or not. Here is what I call my Big Bertha. This here is a 300 Remington Ultra Magnum. Other names are 300 Rum or 300 Ultra. Anyway, it's essentially just a necked down 338 Lapua case, necked down 30 caliber. So there's that. That's what we're going to be mounting this scope on. This scope is a Nikon, what is it called? Nikon FX1000. The Nikon actually doesn't make these anymore. They still warranty them, and somebody I know has one, and it worked really good, and they were a good deal after Nikon discontinued this, so I thought I'd grab one and see if I liked it or not. This scope, as you can see on the turret, is a first focal plane scope, and I've actually compared it in low light and just daylight with the Vortex Razor and a Vortex Viper. I feel like it falls pretty well in between. I think it'll be sufficient for what I'm using it for long range hunting and things like that. So seems like a pretty good scope. I'm going ahead and try it out. Now, for mounting scopes, you can do it without a torque wrench, but I do like having a torque wrench. You definitely don't want to over tighten your scope, but you want it tightened enough. These are the rings I'm using. As mentioned before, they're the Arken rings, 30mm rings. They actually look pretty much identical as the Vortex Pro Series rings. Now, Vortex has I think 3 different types of rings. They have just their Vortex lower end rings. I don't know what those call. We'll call them the base model. And then they had their match rings originally, which are around $100. They just came out with these not too long ago. Well, at least I haven't heard about them. And they are called the Vortex Pro Series. They like I say, they look identical to these Arken ones. I don't know if they're being made in the same factory or what, but they look identical. Now here, I am just kind of getting an idea of where this scope is going to be placed, so I know approximately where I'm going to be mounting the rings on the rail. Now I do have a 20 MOA Picatinny / Weaver rail on there. So after I figure out approximately where I want the scope, I get the rings out and attach them to the base. I generally put Loctite on. Blue Loctite is what I use. I know it's in a red bottle, but this is just blue Loctite I'm putting on. So after I put the bases on, I will then get my lapping kit out and get I don't know what you want to call it, the lapping check gauge, I guess. I'll get that on there, get that all squared up so each side of the ring has approximately the same gap, just to make sure that these rings do not need to be lapped. I don't think they need to be lapped, just based on they seem to be really quality rings. I didn't think they needed to be lapped, but I wanted to check anyway. And as you can see here, it's not perfect. So I did some readjustments, making sure that I was exactly in the middle, getting the tension right, evening out the bars, and I checked it again, and I wasn't perfectly centered, wasn't perfectly lapped, but I thought it would be close enough. Now you may be asking yourself, why would I lap rings, or do I need to lap rings every single time on every single rifle? It depends on a few things. First off, what rifle is it on and how far you're going to shoot that rifle. Secondly, how quality are the rings that you have. If they are cheap rings and you're going to put a scope on a rifle that you don't want to shoot out past 500 yards or so, then you may want to consider lapping them. If they're expensive rings, probably around $50 or no, then my thoughts are you should not have to lap it, even if you are shooting long range. However, there is a possibility that you may need to lap the rings. That's why I checked here and it was pretty close, so I didn't think it would cause an issue for long range shooting. And the other main thing to think about is if you need to lap your rings before is what caliber of rifle you're shooting. Not necessarily taking into account the distance. If it's going to be a heavy recoiling rifle, no matter what distance you're shooting, you're going to want to lap the rings if they're cheap rings and in need of lapping. What happens with cheaper rings generally is they'll actually only contact the scope, in my experience, generally on the edges of the rings. Maybe like 20 to 30% of the ring will actually be contacting the scope. Now, as you can imagine, that would make the scope easier to move, as it's only contacting 20% of the scope instead of 100% of the scope. So by lapping it, you would increase that significantly depending upon how bad the ring is. But if you got a low recoiling rifle, you're not going to shoot past 400, 500 yards, then I think you'd be fine. So generally the exception is if you're going to shoot long range with it and you got cheap rings, you probably want to lap them. And then the other reason I would lap is if they're cheap rings and you put a scope on a heavy recoiling rifle, then I would lap the rings just for the purpose of increasing the amount of tension the rings have on the scope in case you have issues with the scope moving. That is just my opinion. There may be other reasons that I haven't thought of or I am unaware of that you may or may not need to lap the rings. After I've got it all lapped and everything, I'll go ahead and take the top halves off again, keeping them paired with the bottom half that they came off of. After that, I will get the rings attached to the base. Now, these rings are supposed to be set to 30 inch-pounds. So I've got the proper bit and torquing them down to 30 inch-pounds. What I do when I tighten them is I tighten one side a little bit, then I'll go to the other side, I'll tighten the other side a little bit, alternating screws, kind of just tighten them evenly. Next, I am putting my scope on just to make sure it's going to line up where I want it to, so I don't have to change the bases again. Then I get the gun leveled. I like to level both the tilt of the gun and the horizontal line that it's on pretty close. So after I level the gun itself, now I just have the gun in rest. It would be easier in a vise, but as you'll see in this video, you can just use a rest. I get that all level, and then I put on a different level that does not have the y-axis level measurement, just the left and right measurement. Put on that. Then I go to match that level on the rail, which should be level with the bore. I leveled that with the level that I am putting on the barrel so that I can see that level on the barrel while I'm mounting my scope. Obviously, I'm going to have to take off the level on the rail in order to mount the scope. So that's why I put the level on the barrel. When you're leveling this, you're going to have to make a lot of small minor adjustments so the barrel level on the barrel matches the level on the Picatinny rail. So I do some adjustments here to get that exactly where I want it. After they're matched perfectly, I can take the level off of the rail and begin mounting the scope. First off, I just obviously put the scope in there. Then I will get the corresponding top half to the ring base. I'll put some Loctite on all of the screws, and I will start screwing it in lightly. And when I do start to screw it in, I'm trying to have an equal gap between the top half of the ring and the bottom half of the ring. I want to get that gap on all sides of the ring as equal as I can. I'll then tighten them just enough so that I can still move the scope, and then I'll throw the level on top of the scope, level the level on top of the scope with the level on the barrel. We'll at least get it pretty close. Then I'll hold the rifle and test out how much eye relief, test out if the scope is in the right position. Now I like to do this on both the lowest power and the highest power. If I'm good with the lowest power and I'm good with the highest power, then I should be pretty good anywhere in between. Now sometimes you think it feels good when you've got it leveled, and then you get out to the field and you say, oh crap, I got to adjust it. And sometimes that just happens. After I get the eye relief adjusted properly, sometimes it takes a lot of going back and forth and saying, oh, I like this, and then look down at it again and you don't end up liking it as much. So you got to go and switch it, but just get it so that it fits well to you, so that it's comfortable for you. And remember, you've got to do it on the lowest setting, but as well as, and more specifically, the highest setting, because the highest zoom magnification is going to be the most critical, as it has the least amount of flexibility as far as eye box and eye relief goes. And when I'm referring to the eye box, I'm just referring to how much room you have in aligning your eye with the scope. You have to be in the exact perfect position in order to see the entire field of view of the scope, or is there some wiggle room as far as you don't have to be perfect? You can move your head a little bit right and you can still see all of it. You can move it a little bit to the left, you can still see all of it, and up and down as well. Generally, the higher quality scopes will have a more forgiving eye box and generally eye relief as well as some of these cheaper scopes. The eye box on this scope was actually pretty good, can't complain about it, as well as the eye relief. After I've finally got it set to where I want it, I then stick the level on it again and make the necessary adjustments to level the scope to the barrel level. This is when putting that barrel level on really makes a difference. It's very simple. Just after you throw that barrel level on, you know when the bore of the gun is level, then you can level your scope to the bore of the gun by looking at the level on the barrel. It makes it a lot easier. After that, I'll go ahead and tighten down the scope evenly, again doing kind of a star pattern when I tighten down the scope rings to ensure I tighten it down evenly on both sides, leaving an even space, as well as to keep the scope level as I'm tightening it down. If you don't tighten it down in a star pattern, or sometimes even if you do, the scope will not be level once you're finished tightening it down. Once I've tightened it down snug with the screwdriver, I then move to the torque wrench. Now these rings are supposed to be tightened about 18 inch-pounds to the scope. So there I adjust my torque wrench, and I will torque the screws down to the proper torque. Again, torquing each screw down in minor increments as I move in a star pattern. And I also move back and forth from ring to ring so that they tighten down evenly. Now this does take some time to tighten all of them down evenly, doing a little bit by a little bit, but then you don't have to untighten it. If you do it evenly and little by little, then generally the scope will stay level and you don't have to redo it. That's why I do it that way. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was useful to you. And if you have any tips for me, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I would always looking for easier and better ways to do things. So hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, give it a like, and please subscribe if you're not subscribed. I know there's a lot of you that aren't subscribed, so I'd really appreciate it if you just click that subscribe button. YouTube definitely doesn't make things easy to start a gun channel that's not already established, so really would be helpful if you could hit that subscribe button and we can show YouTube that this is the content that we like. We do like it, and there's nothing wrong with gun content. You'd be helping me out, you'd be helping the gun community out, so show YouTube that you do like gun content and that you do like this channel, and we'll see you next week on Firearm Fury.